Cool. It's good for us. That's fine. Yeah. And one of the things about melodies that so speak to me is there's no words to them. You can do some words with some of them, but it's like the music itself so speaks. And one of the things I studied a lot some years back was near-death experiences and past lives and in-between lives. And in some of the books I read, they actually talk how groups of souls get together and they do this harmonizing that's like way beyond anything you get on this planet that we've all heard. And when I read that, I was like, I just got like, oh my God, my soul is so longing for that. Because there are times like I'd get together at a Shabbos table and like the men and the women would harmonize and I would just be in this ecstasy. So when I look, and I learned most of my beginning from Shlomo Carlebach. I was at his shul in New York for about 10 years. And so I'm going to share a few of that and some stories from him as well. One of the things, now Naomi mentioned she met him at 3 years old. Anybody else have any experience?
He gave me a big hug.
Do you actually remember that?
Yeah, I do.
You do?
I remember the hug. I remember like him coming over.
Yeah.
And then, and my mom was like, go on. And she's like, you're going to remember this.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was like this, do you know who he is? He is this, like, really incredible rabbi who really changed, like, the course of Judaism and brought, like, a lot of song and stuff.
He actually got started out here in the 60s, and he had a place in San Francisco, he had Ashbury, called the House of Love and Prayer. It was basically an apartment building that he lived in and a bunch of people lived in.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, and a lot of the Jews who were into drugs at the time, he kind of got them away from drugs and into Judaism instead. And he like channeled a lot of music, and he taught a lot, and he shared all kinds of amazing stories. But probably the most exceptional thing about him was he was more full of love than anybody I had ever met. It's like I never once heard him criticize anybody. He was just always embracing. And there was one time they had a little shul in New York City that used to be his father's, and then he had a twin brother, Elichaim, took over the shul. And it was like a long, narrow shul, like maybe twice as long as these two rooms combined, and only a little bit wider, not a big place. And they would do davening in there, and then afterwards he would come to the back of the shul and make kiddush like Shabbos mornings. And he was like on a first-name basis with all the homeless people in New York. Like he literally knew everybody's name, and he would even go to like the underground places where they lived, and he would do concerts for them, just for the homeless people. He did marriages for them.
Wow.
And sometimes they would come to the shul and kind of hang around, and a lot of them had psychological problems. They weren't very sociable, whatever. And there was one Shabbos I remember that there was a homeless guy who was kind of like shuffling around the back of the shul, just kind of like looking down at the floor, not speaking to everybody. And, you know, people would offer him food, but he basically didn't respond at all, just kind of looked at the floor. And unfortunately, like a lot of the homeless people, they didn't take care of themselves, and like his body just reeked. You know, you could smell him, you know, halfway across the shul. And everybody in the shul was always respectful. Nobody ever said anything, you know, other than offering him food. And he just kind of shuffled around. So when the davening was over, when the services were over, he came to the back of the shul and he made kiddush. And then, and I was standing like right next to Shlomo, and there was another rabbi to my side. And this homeless man was in the back also. And Shlomo, right after Kiddush, he looks around and he says, "Hey, Brother John, how you doing?" And he goes up to him, and the guy just reeks. And he just grabs him and gives him a bear hug. And I'm And we planned out a 3-session. This is the first of 3 sessions, God willing. And the first one was kind of dealing on the national level, because for Jews, the whole issue of what happens to Jews has been so central in our core. And it's kind of interesting because when I was in rabbinical school, one of my history professors said, you know, the way we Jews look at Jewish history isn't really what happened. He said, we look at it like the last 2,000 years have basically been like one disaster after another. Like we were oppressed here, and there was this pogrom here, and then that happened. And he said, basically, for the last 2,000 years, in most places, most of the time, with a few notable exceptions, Jews actually got along great with our neighbors. And I was like, really? That's like not everything I ever learned. So that kind of gave me a different perspective. But one of the things, obviously, that was significant for all of us was the Holocaust. That seemed to be like the worst of the worst for most Jews. And when I was living in New York and I went to Shlomo's synagogue, he had a get-together on Yom HaShoah, on the day that we usually remember the Holocaust. And one of the things I had learned from Shlomo was that his way, the Hasidic way, there was always a different way of looking at things. You know, the way 99%, even of the Jewish world would look at something, like Shlomo would often like flip it completely on its head. And I have many, many stories about that. So I went to this memorial service on Yom HaShoah, which turned out not to be that at all. And he actually shared that he had been invited. His father was a chief rabbi in Austria right before the war in Vienna. And they actually got out in like 1938, 1939, like right before it got impossible to leave Europe. And then his father had this synagogue in New York that he and his brothers eventually took over when his father passed away. So he said that he had been invited to a commemoration of Kristallnacht in Europe. He had been invited with a bunch of mostly non-Jews who wanted him to be at service for Kristallnacht, when the Nazis like broke all kinds of glass windows, which is literally what it was talking about, and lots of Jewish businesses were burned, and that's when things like really started to go downhill for the Jews in Germany and in Europe. And he said at this ceremony they had for Kristallnacht, and he said there were like 2,000-3,000 people in this huge auditorium. And he said basically they were like monks and nuns and religious people. And what they had done for the program was they hired like 2 actors, a man and a woman, dressed in black. And basically almost the entire time they read names of people who had died in the Holocaust. You know, and Shlomo was like this was horrible. Like, these people wanted to know what was the Judaism that was lost. And he says, basically, you're hitting them on the head saying, you stupid non-Jews, look what you did to us. And these weren't the people who did it. These people wanted to know, what was it all about? So what he did on this service for Yom HaShoah was he gave us a taste of what was lost, what was the beauty of Judaism before the Holocaust. And he told a particular story that's known as the Moishe Good Shabbos story, very broken from Moishe house. And what was amazing with Shlomo was there was a particular melody that he would always use when he did a bracha, when he did a blessing over something, and he used it in the services a lot also. And it would go... And I heard this for years and years, and I never thought much about where the melody came from. I just assumed it was one of his. But then at this particular Yom HaShoah event, he actually shared where it came from. And he said when he was a boy, he was about 7 years old, and things got really bad in Austria before his family left. And it was so dangerous at that point that the kids had to stay home all the time. Like they literally could not go out in the streets. And it became so dangerous for Jews that the only time Jews would go out would be Shabbos morning, like early morning, like 6 in the morning. People would his father was still like the rabbi of Austria. They would knock on his door, and they would quickly open the door, and everybody would come in, and they would quickly daven shachrit, do the morning service. And then hour and a half later, everybody would go home before anybody was on the street. And that was it. Literally, it was the only time they saw anybody the whole week. So Shlomo said, needless to say, it's like they were dying to see some people. So when Shabbos morning would come around, he and his brother would be just standing there right at the door waiting for that knock, because there'd be somebody there, somebody they hadn't, seen the entire week. So basically, there would be a knock on the door, and they'd open the door, and people would come in quickly and take a seat, and and they were getting ready to start davening. And all of a sudden, there's a knock on the door, and Shlomo opened the door this time, and there's a man standing there, and Shlomo said he was not Karliner Chassid, I think a Rishner Chassid. And he said Rishner Chassid, they have a neat trimmed beard, it's not like the long beard. And he said he had this presence that immediately Shlomo noticed there was something different about him. And instead of just hurrying in, standing right there with the door open, he starts singing, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos. And then he walks in, and they close the door, and he said, Shlomo said he never stopped singing. And he says to Shlomo, he starts singing, and what is your name? This is in Yiddish. Little boy, and what is your name? Shlomo, who was musical already at that time, he sings back to him. My name is Shlomo. My name is Shlomo. And then he asks him what his name is. He says, my name is Moishe. Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos. And basically everything Moishe did, he sang. So they start services, and the chazan, the cantor who's leading, he starts doing it, but there's so much fear in everybody's hearts with everything going on the streets that there's just no spirit to it. And finally Moshe said, you're supposed to pray the prayers up to God, and you're praying them down to the floor, and it's I can't handle it. I don't mean to be disrespectful. And the chazan said, I'm so sorry, I just don't have it in my heart. So everybody said, Moishe, could you please lead the davening? So Moishe starts leading the davening, and it comes to Nishmat. Nishmat Kolchai, the breath of all living life. Tivarech et Shimcha. It's we praise you with every breath. And some of them knew, this might literally be their last breath this week. And he led the services, and it was just like the singing that they hadn't had in who knows how long. And of course, the services were not over, chick-chock, an hour and a half like typical, they didn't finish till noon. So finally they finished the services, and everybody's heart is just so full from Moshe Good Shabbos. And they asked him to do Kiddush. And he said, I'm very honored, but I want you to know, my tradition when I do Kiddush is everything has to be open. And they had all the drapes pulled and all the doors shut. And they said, are you kidding? If anybody on the street sees this, God forbid. And Moishe says, we have to, and here's why. And he says, if our brother Esau was the brother of Yaakov, and he had kind of gone down one path, and Jacob had gone down a different path. And he said, if our brother Esau could remember how holy he is, if I could just remind him how holy Shabbos is and how holy he is, none of this would be going on. And it's like literally he was on a mission that everybody, even what was going on at that time, that they should know how holy they are. This wouldn't be happening. So they were like, okay. So they literally opened all the curtains, opened all the doors and windows, and he made Kiddush using his melody, and nothing happened. Then, of course, they shut things, and because it was already midday, nobody went out in the street. So they basically hung out the whole Shabbos. And Moishe explained that he was the most wanted man in Austria at that time, that his face was actually on billboards all over the city. Because what would happen is, if, God forbid, somebody's husband would get taken away, he would go and bring food to the wife and comfort the kids. So he'd be making the rounds of the city comforting everybody whose husband had gotten taken away. So they actually had signs saying, number one enemy of the German people, with his face on it. And he had once gotten caught and then got away. But, he was really fearless. In fact, Shlomo said he was a melech. He was a king. And he said what a king is somebody who has no fear. He's willing to do whatever it takes without fear. And he said Moishe was like a king. So basically, they spent the whole Shabbos together. And at the end of Shabbos, Shlomo's family had gotten visas to get out that week. They were going to be leaving Thursday or Friday to come to the United States. And Moishe said he would come by one more time to say goodbye. And he said he'll come by on Wednesday, and he'll knock 7 times the Kabbalah Shabbos in honor of Shabbos. And, and they'll be able to share a little bit more. And so sure enough, Wednesday night comes, and they hear 7 knocks, and they open the door. And there's a question, if you forget to say Havdalah after Shabbat ends, we normally say the Havdalah service. And if you forget Saturday night, then the question is, well, can you still do it on Sunday? Can you do it on Monday? When is it too late? And basically they say up to Tuesday you can do it, but Wednesday already you're looking forward to the next Shabbos, so it's too late. So basically, for Moishe, either he was remembering the past Shabbos or he was looking forward to the next one. So of course, Wednesday, night, Shlomo opens the door. When he knocks 7 times, he starts singing, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos. So he comes in, and they share some more stories, and then the next day, Shlomo's family leaves, and he never hears from him again, and he always wondered what happened to him. And some years later, when he was in Israel, he found out from somebody who had been with him, finally Moshe got that he needed to leave the city because it was just getting too dangerous even for him. And this guy said he was actually on a train leaving the city, and unfortunately, sorry, I get emotional. He was spotted, and they actually beat him to death on the train as he was leaving the city. But this guy who was standing next to him, who was sitting next to him on the train, said, Moishe did not stop singing until his very last breath. He was, once they spotted him, he was singing, Good Shabbos, Good Shabbos. Good Shabbos, 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 Good things that I learned from Shlomo that night was it's possible to be in this joy no matter what's going on in life. I mean, personally, I can't think of anything I've ever experienced as bad as what was going on then. And Moishe had the courage, even with his last dying breath, to never stop singing and never stop and now we often call it holding space. When you have a knowing that somebody can have a freedom in their life from whatever's bothering them. Whether they've had abuse in their past or they've got addictions going on or whatever it is, there's a thing where you holding space is like, you just know that they can have a better future than what they have for themselves now. And Moishe was like holding that, even for all the people there who were willing to do anything and eventually even killed him. He was absolutely firm in holding space for them to have a new life. And that's one of the things that Lynette and I are so absolutely committed to, because this amazing woman here has gone through stuff like I don't know from most of in her life. And I'm going to let her share a little bit about it, because it's been such an example for me of the courage. She has more courage than any woman I have ever met in my life. What she's gone through, and she's going to share, and how she's tackled everything that's come before her is such an inspiration for me that, and both of us, we both spent like about 20 years total and like $100,000 like studying everything under the sun. We were talking some before, all these different things we've learned, landmark, matrix energetics, avatar. It's like so many techniques to like clear anything out of our space and to have this like complete inner peace about everything. And we've also learned these techniques about once you have that peace, how you actually create what you want in your life. And Lynette is really, this is like her wheelhouse. She's really a specialist in this. So I want you to meet my lovely fiance. We're actually getting married in 2 weeks. And you are all invited to join us. We would be delighted. In fact, one last thing before she stands up. I had shared this earlier, I guess, in the kitchen. Shlomo, when he had the House of Love and Prayer, there was a couple who got engaged who were living there. And Shlomo said, I'm going to take care of the invitations for you. Like, don't worry about it. So 2 weeks later, he hands the invitations to the bride and groom, and it says, the whole world is invited to the wedding of so-and-so. Literally, it was an open invitation, like anybody who felt they should be there was invited. And I've shared this with Lynette, and that's our tradition also. So you are literally all invited to our wedding 2 weeks from now. We'll give you details.
This feels so formal. I think I'm going to.
You want to sit?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead and sit.
Is that comfortable for you?
Yeah, it's great. Can you just leave the camera still?
So.
Just try to turn it down.
Thank you for giving me space to share my story. I haven't shared in this way before, like 3 generations of trauma in my family. So, and I'm really feeling soft and vulnerable, especially I really opened up my heart today and just decided today to get married in 2 weeks. So I'm like...
We were engaged, but we just decided we weren't going to wait until we had money to do the wedding the way we wanted to. It's just like, you know what, we just want to be married, and we're doing it.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah, so I told them, I shared with Naomi and Jason, I may break down crying, and that's all good. And my family, my mom and dad, they got married after my mom already had me 6 months later. It was a party, and it was just a one-night stand kind of thing. And, so later on, my mom and dad did get together after I was about 6 months old. And about 5 years old, my mom and dad started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. They had come to the door. My mom started really believing that they had what the truth of the Bible was. And she was raised a Mennonite. And so on her side of the family, there were 11 kids, and she was in the middle. And the mom and dad were mostly out in the vineyards all the time. They were raised on a grape vineyard. And the kids were raising each other. So the oldest child was in charge of the middle children, and the middle children were in charge of the babies. And so they were alone a lot, and they didn't have TV, radio, or not much to do. Hardly any money, So they didn't have toys. So the oldest son was actually sexually touching all the babies, my aunts. And they were used to that kind of comforting when they were crying, and they remember from the time, like being in high chairs, and they even remember that happening. And they didn't get like hugs, and there wasn't like affection other than that was the only attention. So there was a lot of sexual addiction within the family, and like cousins and aunts were playing with each other as kids, and like this was really pretty common in at least in my family. And then in my dad's side of the family, he was raised by his stepfather, and he had 3 sisters and another full-blooded sister. And my grandma used to mess around on the step ground, who she was married to, and he would totally take it out on my dad. So my dad got he was tied to a tree once overnight by a train. Every time my dad tried raising rabbits, he was taught by his grandpa to raise rabbits for food because they hardly had any food. And the stepfather would tear down all his bunny hutches and let the bunnies go. And he tore down. He had a greenhouse and he was raising fruits and vegetables, and he tore that down. He got a paper route when he was young, and he took away the bike and didn't let him do that. And so it was like anything he tried to do was just destroyed. But yet he was really good at like coming up with new ideas and ways to make money and everything. So when my mom and dad got together, my dad was really good at like providing. We always had like a really nice house, and it looked really good on the outside to others, but inside, mom and dad didn't have skills in the way of like showing affection or allowing any type of emotional. There wasn't any like sharing how I felt. And I was really quiet, and I just learned from being raised with them that it's better to like blend in with the furniture. Dad would have spouts of rage, and I think there were a lot of things he didn't even remember from his childhood because he had a tendency to like when he would black out rage, his eyes would go black, and he had no control, and he would just kick you, throw you, and I learned how to run to the bathroom and just lock the door. And this happened with all my siblings. There's 4 of us, and everybody, it felt very much like, I thought all families were like this, and I just thought you have to survive it. You just have skills that I learned to say one thing and do another. To get my needs met, I would just like sneak them or lie or I learned to tell half truths so that I could get away with it, and I never thought I could have what I wanted outright. So in the religion I was raised, my parents didn't allow me to do any outside activities. I could only do what the Jehovah's Witness is very strict. You can't do outside activities outside of what you have to do in school. You're not allowed to take up sports, or you're raised to go door to door, and you don't have friends outside of the organization. So I did try to be really devoted, and I would go out door to door, and I was really trying. I was real shy, so I would beg God, please show me to speak, because I'd get to the door and I would just freeze. But I really wanted to share God's words. So at about 17, my voice opened up, and I was able to to share and talk about it. And it was close to my heart, but then I got discouraged because I found that other people were not quite living up to what, I thought, we were supposed to live up to everything we were being taught, and then I'd find out in secret, at home, that things weren't going on that way. And even in my own home, my mom and dad were not living up to what we were being taught. And I'm like, wow, so maybe this isn't real, So I started looking outside, and but then I'd get discouraged because they so discourage going out to other faiths and talk about apostasy, which is somebody who was dedicated to being, if you're baptized as a witness and you go out and go to another faith, you're like worse than a regular sinner. You're an apostate. It means you're going against God Jehovah, and you're an apostate, which means there's no forgiveness, there is no coming back, there's no resurrection for you. And so witnesses it's very hard for them to go into another belief or church or anything. But I went on that search because I wasn't finding this belief to be satisfying. I didn't feel a closeness with God that I wanted to feel. And so I started searching other places, and I found, I got really discouraged in my search and started doing drugs and alcohol and just trying to numb out because I couldn't deal with all the emotions and feelings from all the trauma, too, that was going on in my family. And I went to shrinks, and they just did this talk therapy, and I was getting nowhere with them, and I'm like, wow. And so I started self-medicating, and I get in abusive relationships because I wanted to get out of my house, and I got hooked up with heroin addicts, alcoholics, crank addicts. I would deal drugs. I'd get tired of that lifestyle. I'd go back to being a Jehovah's Witness and get back in good standing because I would get disfellowshipped for doing these things, which means shunned, where they don't talk to you. And about a year of going back, then you can get reinstated and then have your privileges back and talk to everyone and go door to door. So I would go back and forth between those two lifestyles for a while until I got really tired of doing both. I'm like, I need a spiritual path. And then I came down with hepatitis C, and the doctor scared me. They said that kills you. There's no cure for it. You will die of it. It attacks the liver, and you have to get off drugs and alcohol. And I had to change my lifestyle. I was only 27, so I'm like, okay, I better change it. So I got clean and sober, and I found yoga, massage, I started juicing, I started nutrition, and I had no idea that eating healthy had a lot to do with my depression and I had suicidal tendencies. And a minute I started juicing, my mood started lifting. I felt my body was like soaking it up like a sponge, and I was like, wow, I'm happy every day I juice, And I found exercise I loved in yoga, and I found touch and massage, like somebody who was present with me. I just cried the first time I got a massage because I'd never been touched like that in my life, and my body was like craving it. I was like, yes. But while I had been doing the partying and the drugs part, my son had gone through a lot of trauma through all my relationships and I put the men in my life and the drugs first, and he got sent to my mother's or my sister's when it was just too much for me because I was so caught up in trying to just survive what was going on internally and in my head. And so my son got left one time. The worst of it. I'm giving you the very worst of it at the end. But I was slamming heroin and cocaine in every vein, from all the way from my neck all the way down to my toes, any vein that was available. And at the end, I was going in my neck. And one time I was in this really bad house where we were doing this, and I sent my son out. He was only maybe 8 or 9, and he was in the playground of this really bad neighborhood, and he was like, there was nobody else. It was like during the day when most kids are in school and everything, and I had him playing out there while I was in there doing that, and I don't remember how long I was in there, but just remembering it makes me just cringe, because I'm like, wow, that's like so unbelievable that I would do. Today I am not that person. But my son knows me as that, and even today, we are not speaking. That has not been healed. He doesn't know who I am. He's now 28 years old, and he goes, I don't even know who you are. And he can relate more to the party mom than the person I am now is so stark and different that he's like, he can't even relate to me. Now, he's been running around with people that drink and do drugs and all of that. So now he's dealing with that. And his cousin, who he was raised with, my nephew, at 23, overdosed on methadone and died at 23. And that has a lot to do with our family stuff that's been passed down. And there's other stuff going on with my nieces and nephews that shows what the effects of this generational trauma. It's trickled down. So on my part, what I have done is I've sought out I moved to San Jose because I wanted to dive into transformational work and whatever would heal this. My mission has been like self-healing and then share it with other people. And really, ultimately, my family is like at my core. It's like I just want to give this to my family. Now, they're not all open to this. My little sister is. She's on the path with me, and she is, in fact, partly living with us most of the time now. But she is blossoming and doing really well. And I found landmark education, and it's transformational work, and I found amazing ways to like transform things, and avatar and matrix energetics, and probably 6 other energy modalities along with the essential oils, and eating really healthy and doing qigong and massage. And I've found that a really powerful way is to reframe it, and you can go back to any memory. Wait, let me start with this. Let me come back. So if you find there's a pattern that keeps reoccurring over and over and over, that's usually from some kind of trauma that was started when you were younger, and that pattern gets repeated over and over and over. It gets very ingrained, and you're very invested in your stories about what happened, and it gives you a way of being that's the lenses that you're looking out of sees the world in a certain way, and it'll keep repeating over and over until you get to the source of it. So you can go back in time to when the memory first started, where the source point, like the seed was planted, and you can go there and reframe it and find a new way of being with it. Like I saw my parents. I was seeing that angels all around my house when I was like 5, and that my parents' angels showed up. And I never realized I've had contact with my own angels and my own team, and that they help me. But I realized my parents have theirs too, even though they're not totally aware of it or conscious of it. They do have their own team of angels. So I saw them like sending love into my house. And my parents breaking down on their knees and just crying. And I walk in and they're like, I'm sorry, Ned, I didn't know it was hurting you. And we all like snuggled and hugged on the couch and just felt such a softening in me that I know energetically they feel it. I know they do. I've had my son call me and say, what are you doing? I feel such peace. And I hear every song I hear is peaceful, and I know you're doing something. And I had just dropped a prayer for my son in a prayer box, like 10 minutes before. And I'm like, you felt that? And he's like, well, yeah. And this is a kid who doesn't acknowledge any kind of energy work or healing work or angels or nothing, and he felt it. And so I know that my mom and dad felt what happened. And I called my dad today, right before we came here, and I have been married already 3 times. And the last time I invited my dad to my last wedding, he goes, well, I'm not going to make this one. So if I don't make this one, I'll make the next one. And I'm like, wow. I mean, that, I laughed because that's how my family does. It's like sarcasm, but it's like a knife and it digs, And today when I called him, he said, we will get tickets and we will be there. Text me the date, text me the time and your address, and we will be there. And he's in Las Vegas. And I'm like, what? That is weird. I know.
And he added he could tell this was different.
Yeah, he said, I can feel this is different. My dad never talks like that. And it's like, and so I totally believe, even with my mother, that a shift will happen. And my son, he texted me, a month ago, and started spitting out all this, anger, huge anger. And he's been holding it in for a long time, and I knew it was coming. And I am grateful he did it, because I know the cork has to come off, And he spewed, and I'm like, okay, great, you're getting it out. And I'm like, I'm right here, I'm listening. We're doing this all by text, because that's the only way. Any other way, and we're like, it doesn't work. So we're texting this. And he told me later, Mom, I was on crank. I hope you understand that. And he's texting me that. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. And he said, well, I'm getting clean right now, so I don't want to ruin my vibes, so please don't respond. But I don't want you to be left with my last words being hateful to you. Because he lost, my nephew died because my son and him got in a terrible fight. And actually my son told his cousin, you're not my cousin, I don't want to ever see you again. And he died before my son was able to clear that up. And so I think he knows that he doesn't want that. If something were to happen to me, he doesn't want the last words to be, angry or hateful. So I was like, oh, good. My son is getting in touch with his heart, and he's, he's now getting clean. And I know that his team of angels or whatever beings that are watching over him are helping him. And that my working on myself is clearing my whole family and the whole generation. And I totally believe that if each one of us are the way showers, the ones ahead of the line with our machetes,
Not cutting off heads.
No. Just the stuff, all the patterns, just clearing the way, then our families will have a clear path for them, so they can follow. Yeah, so I share that story with you too. I've never gone through all of that with anyone.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Beautiful sharing.
Thank you for being with us.
So one of the reasons that we wanted to share this is, Jewish generational trauma. It's all about people and how everybody has stuff that they've kind of, literally been passed down. Some of it generationally, some of it we pick up along the way in our current lifetimes. And we've really been at work at looking at all the ways to clear things. And Linda has examples from her family, stuff that's been passed down, and that she did with her son, that she, just had no tools at the time as a mom to deal with it. There was just so much pain and agony. And I also have my own stories about stuff that's been passed down in generations in my family that I could share as well. But what I wanted to do at this point was kind of open things up and just see what you guys would like to share. There's a lot of directions we could go now. Do you have anything along these lines you want to share from your own families, or ways to deal with things that you'd like us to maybe share a little?
Like a open, that when you do share something, especially when you dig in and like share something that you wouldn't want anybody to know. I know that's like, wow, why would I share something I don't want anyone to know? That when that happens, there's a freedom in it. It's so magical. And this is a sacred space. We've created it. We have confidence. That's one of the things I usually start with, is confidentiality, and anything that's shared here is not shared anywhere else, that we all agree. Does everybody agree to that with a raise of hand?